Good morning. So we're trendsetters here at the Bilingual Directors Meeting. Yesterday with our new directors, we started a few minutes early, and today we're going to start just a few minutes early as well. Please feel free to continue to get breakfast and to get settled. I'm Joanne Clyde. I want to welcome you here and introduce our Chief Education Officer for the Board of Education, Dr. Ernesto Matias.
Didn't you love it? That's the shortest introduction. You didn't have to put up with the nonsense of bios for today, for me anyway. I just want to take a couple minutes to welcome you today, but also to thank you very, very much. I know that some of you guys, when you're thinking about the Venezuelan crisis that you're dealing with, when you're thinking about the Ukrainians coming in, that I just heard a lot more are coming in, this is why we're here, right? To hear, to talk, to try to come up with solutions towards that. One of the things that I want to do today is honor our multilingual team, because they're going, if you don't know, they're going to Poland to try to get us an MOU with the Polish government so that we can bring more Polish teachers in who could potentially help us with our Ukrainian situation. The amount of MOUs that they've signed in the last year and a half, 2 years, to try to bring you the kind of short-term teachers that you need, right? Because we know that long-term, getting our own CTE careers to education programs up and running, our seal of biliteracy, increasing that for all of our children is really important in order to have a sustainable pipeline of bilingual teachers. And so I just wanted to take a few minutes to shout out to the multilingual team and to each of the bilingual directors and or teachers and administrators who are here today, because our job got harder after the pandemic, and you know it, you're there every day. How do we do this work? How do they let us do this work, right? Because if you're like me, it's simply about the students, right? It's simply about affecting the lives of our bilingual students so that they can truly be bilingual, bicultural. How do you do that if bureaucracy gets in the way? How do you do that if the political aspect gets in the way, right? Which you're dealing with in your own situations. So just want to take a couple of minutes to shout all of the bilingual directors that are here, the multilingual team, the great work that you're doing today, the fact that you didn't quit when a lot of our fellow educators quit during the pandemic and after the pandemic is truly, to me, heroic and courageous. So I just want to thank you today and hope that you have a great day. And please ask the multilingual team, tell them what the woes are. And I know their hearts is to try to help, and they try to help all the time. So thank you very much. Have a great morning.
All right. So again, I'm Joanne Clyde. I am the director of the Multilingual Department, and it is my pleasure to welcome you all here to our annual Bilingual Directors Meeting. We do have some just general announcements that I want to draw your attention to. If you have not, please check in at the meeting registration desk and pick up your swag bag. We have 2 phenomenal books for you. Please be mindful of social distancing, and if you want to wear a mask, please feel free to do so. There is internet access here, so please make sure you look for the network that is CHIOK_conference. The password is VIP 2022, with the VIP all capitalized. Parking. Stop by the meeting registration desk before you leave each day to get a voucher for free parking. Otherwise, you may have to pay for it. Well, you will have to pay for it if you don't get the free voucher. And if you are staying at the hotel, the parking charge will be forwarded to the master bill. So, you may have noticed that there might be a dot on your badge if you are a bilingual director. What is that dot? Well, that dot is a networking tool. So if you have a blue dot, you are a brand new director, or you indicated that you're a brand new director. Green dot, a director for less than 3 years. Yellow dot, you've got 3 to 5 years experience. And red dot, you are an experienced director. The purpose is experienced directors. If you see a blue or green dot, please take them under your wing. Please encourage them. Please mentor them. Green and blue dots, if you see other green and blue dots, these are going to be your buddies. You're learning together. It's your professional learning community. And when you see those yellow and red dots, those are your mentors. Those are people who have been where you've been, who have experienced the experiences that you are experiencing. And I don't know how many more times I can say experience in that sentence, but that we wanted an easier way for you to know who you should reach out to. And you will find there is no more friendlier group of people than bilingual directors. So please reach out. If you are new, don't be shy. Introduce yourself, make a new acquaintance. And let's see. Important reminder about wearing masks if you want. Be mindful of social distancing. We do have some social media. So there's the Illinois Resource Center on LinkedIn, and there is a hashtag, IL Bilingual Directors 22. So if you are on Twitter and you want to tweet about your experiences, please use that hashtag. There are time slots, maybe still be time slots available for one-on-one Zoom appointments with your ISB principal consultants on September 26th and 27th, next week, Monday, Tuesday. To sign up, check your email for the link. If you can't find that, talk to the friendly folks at the registration desk, and I'm sure they'll be happy to help you with that. If there is no time slot available for your principal consultant, please reach out to your principal consultant directly. They are more than happy to have a one-on-one meeting with you anytime throughout the year to answer your questions. Don't forget to sign in and sign out each day in order to receive the PD credit. Look for notifications and or the QR code to access the sign-in and sign-out sheet. Don't forget to fill out the evaluation form that you'll receive after the meeting. You'll receive an email early next week with a link inviting you to fill it out, and attendees will receive 10 hours of professional learning time. Now, if you are interested in meeting informally after today, around 4 o'clock-ish, we have all of the breakout rooms will still be available. So you are welcome to take a group and use one of those rooms if you'd like to have a further meeting or conversation. You don't need to ask for permission from us. So as long as it's one of the rooms listed on our program, you are welcome to use it after the day ends for your meetings. Please be back here for lunch at 12:15. It's going to be delicious. And now I have the pleasure of introducing our first general session speaker, who is Ray Clements, who is in our accountability department. And she is going to be presenting on accountability indicators for English learners in 2022 and beyond.
Thank you. If I could get my slides, perfect. Hi, my name is Ray Clements. As Joanne said, I am the accountability director, and that makes me one of the 5 most hated people in the state, I think. Everyone's favorite topic, right? But just a little bit about me and why I care about the work that I do. I started at the agency about 8 years ago working with our lowest performing 5% of schools, and the kids in those schools deserve the best that we can give them, the best of ourselves, the best education. And so for me, accountability is about identifying areas that need support and then giving it. And so with that in mind, I'd love to talk to you specifically about how we're thinking about accountability for ELs. So how do we get the slides up? So that they can see the slides. Great. And then next. Got it. Okay. So the very first thing that we had to do, right, because we know that our learners were deeply impacted by the pandemic, was we needed to set new ELA and math proficiency targets. We did that by taking a new baseline. We used 2021 state average performance as our new baseline. And so obviously, we know that that was a challenging year for assessments and for our students. Those baselines are pretty low. We will take a look at them here in just a second. That does mean then that they move forward fairly quickly, but we'll talk about how that can be, considered. The other significant change that we made was that it used to be there was one set of targets for all grades 3 through 8, and there was another set of targets for high school, right? And if you're at high school, that's still the same. You're grade 11 because you're still just grade 11. That's the test. But at the 3-8 level, what we noticed in the data was that there were deeper impacts at the lower grades. And so for us, it made sense to set 3 sets of targets. One set for grades 3 and 4, one set for grades 5 and 6, one set for grades 7 and 8, right? Because the impact of the pandemic seemed to be different depending on what grade you were in. There's a link on the slide there that takes you to those new targets. And like I said, we'll look at them very briefly when we get there. Additionally, in 2022 only, we will be using science participation instead of proficiency. Not specific to ELs, but just a change that affects everyone. Another change that affects everyone, including our ELs, is that we're doing 2 types of growth calculations. We measure growth. It's 50% of the system at the elementary and middle school level. And we do that by calculating a student growth percentile. It's a number that compares a student to his or her academic peers. And an academic peer is a student in the same grade, same subject, that has the exact same prior starting scale score. So all the kids that start at a 300 are being compared to all the other kids that start at 300. The kids that start at 500 are being compared to the kids that start at 500. And the number that you get, and a way to think about it is, it's kind of telling you how fast you're traveling down the road, right? You're in a car, you're traveling from Chicago to Springfield, Springfield to Chicago. You're going about 50 miles an hour. What happened in the pandemic was that we all experienced a great big storm, and it slowed us down. Some kids, it slowed down to about 40, right? Some kids, it slowed down to 30. And some kids had to pull over, right? They just had to stop. They couldn't, because they couldn't see. So now, when we think about growth, and we think about what it takes to get our kids back on that road to learning, we need to think about how we get them back up to highway speeds, right? That's what we need to do with our kids. So the 2 types of growth percentiles tell us 2 different things. One, the sort of traditional method tells us how a kid is doing compared to all the other kids in the same academic year, right? Are they ahead of or behind their academic peers? The other number tells us how fast they're going relative to their academic peers from a prior baseline year, 2019 in this case. We want to know, are we back up to those pre-pandemic highway speeds? And so those 2 numbers are really only interesting when they're different, right? And in Illinois' case, there is a small ray of optimism that, in fact, our baseline SGP, the one that compares our speed, our growth, to a prior 2019 year, is actually higher than our traditional cohort. And that means that our kids are growing at a slightly faster rate, thanks to all of your amazing efforts at the additional tutoring, the before school, the after school, the summer school. They are, in fact, growing a little bit faster than kids did in 2019. So there you go. Your hard work is paying off. We have the data to show it. The other thing that we're doing is we've condensed down to 1 scoring formula for grad rate. This, again, is a topic that's very unique to ELs in this way. We used to have 2 scoring formulas, one for a majority of our student groups and then one for children with disabilities. It's now 1. We kept the top end of the scoring range for children with disabilities because, we get it. You serve kids who may need to stay past 4 or 5 or sometimes even 6 years. And so you should be able to have a population of those students and still potentially earn full points on the indicator. So we set that at about 93%. That group of kids is your population that may take DLM. They have the most significant cognitive disabilities. It's about 1, 2, hopefully 5 at the high end % of your population. So 7% gives you a little bit of room to serve that population and to serve them well. The bottom end we kept from the general formula, and that identifies any high school that graduates fewer than 2/3 of their kids. And that comes straight from ESL law. We are required by law to identify any high school that graduates fewer than 2/3 of their students. The good news is we don't have many of those high schools in Illinois. We should be very proud of that. The part you're really interested in is specifically the English Learner Progress to Proficiency indicator. So we made a combination of temporary and permanent changes. The big one is that every student who was identified as an EL in 2021 gets 1 additional year to their timeline. They normally have 5, they now have 6. It's a good thing. They need that extra year. The other thing that we're doing, this is for 1 year only, is that we're going all the way back and using 2020 as the prior. So we're actually measuring their progress over 2 years rather than just 1. Gives them a bigger number to put at the top as the numerator. What that does, though, is it has the effect of excluding students who were newly identified as ELs in 2021, right? Because if you were newly identified as EL in 21, you don't have a 2020 prior. Please remember, we did complete all access testing in 2020 before any school closures occurred. So that's a nice, solid data set, lots of room, and good data for our kids to demonstrate their progress. I do have another session later today that will go very deeply into that specific indicator. So if you're interested, please join me. And then I have one on Friday where we'll really be diving deep into the data itself and how to use it to potentially inform instruction. So check it out if that's something you'd like to learn more about. Chronic absenteeism is another indicator that really has hit, I think, a lot of schools and districts hard this last year. We took a look at the preliminary data in January, which is when we had to submit our amendment to the U.S. Department of Education, and at the time, we couldn't justify changing the actual scoring formula. Right now, 0% kids chronically absent gets you the best score, 50% of your kids chronically absent or more gets you no points. And I still think that's reasonable, right? If 50% of your kids or more are missing 10% of the school year, that's a lot of time and a lot of missed opportunity to learn. And so, but we have put in place for 1 year only some differentiated scoring bands that help incentivize any amount of improvement over 21. I mean, our rates in 21 went sky high, so if you can get them down even the tiniest little bit, gets you a little bit of an extra multiplier. And even if you couldn't, even if your rates are still higher, just holding steady at pre-pandemic rates is still an accomplishment. And so we also have a band where if you've stayed within 5 percentage points of your 2019 rate, you get a little multiplier there too. So something to think about. On the other hand, we know that ELs in general are one of the groups that have the lowest rates of chronic absenteeism. They value everything that you give them and the connection that you give them. So hopefully that is something that will return to normal here pretty quickly for you. All of these changes, though, and the fact that there are kids who are missing scores from 2021, so they're not in the growth calculation, and well, they're newly identified ELs, so they're not in the ELP-to-P calculation. All of that introduces a little bit of uncertainty. It's just a little bit more noise in the system. We don't know if what we're seeing is real and it's going to persist, or if it's an anomaly that'll just fix itself over time. So what we've done to help alleviate some of that is we've also created the option to exit status early in 2023. It's basically if you're newly identified in 2022 as needing targeted or comprehensive support, that might be something that we need to really truly support you with, or it might be something that when the data gets more back to normal just sort of bounces. And so if in 2023 you are commendable or exemplary, and you fall in one of 3 eligibility categories, you're able to exit status early. So something to kind of think about. I've decided that my plan is to get a t-shirt made that just says, "Don't over-interpret the data." Don't over-interpret the data, and I'm just gonna wear it for the next month. That's my plan. Because if I have one message, it's that. Don't. It's good. Look at it. Let it tell you what it can. But then don't think that it's the end of the world or doom and gloom. It's something that we just need to move past and focus on the early signs that we're getting in 2023. And then last but not least, we do have some additional meta indicators. They're not in the system right now. They were planned to come online here in the next couple of years, and that's been delayed just so that we have 3 good years of data to validate off of. So I do briefly want to focus on the 2 indicators that are most specific to ELs, ELA and math proficiency, and the English learner progress to proficiency. So for proficiency, ELA and math, that's the regular IAR or SAT or DLM. At the highest level, the calculation is really still the same. We always looked at whatever your school's percent proficient was, and we divided it by whatever the interim target was. I know, no one told you there'd be math in this, right? This is bilingual directors. But there's a lot of math. If you were at or above the target, you got the full points. If you were under the target, you still got the ratio. You got credit for however close to the target you got. And really, that's still the same. In fact, for high schools, it's specifically the same. The only thing that's changed is the target itself. That's been reset. Again, people often wonder about that 95% participation requirement, right? Everybody talks about how you got to get 95% of your kids to participate in the assessment. Where does that factor into accountability? It's right here. It's in the calculation of percent proficient, because we have to calculate it out of either the number of kids who tested or 95% of those who should have. And so I will just say, as you're looking at your data, if you see some really funny numbers on the bottom, if you see 0.3 kids, that's because we calculated out of 95% of those who needed to test. That's where that comes from. So let's take a look at, again, we talked about the 3 different grade groups. We talked about why 3 groups. Ultimately, it's a trade-off. We saw that pattern in the data of larger impacts at the lower grades, but you want to try to keep your group sizes as large as possible. The more groups you have, the more potential for rounding error. There's not a lot. We calculate out to the 15th decimal. What if I don't have all the grades in the band, right? What if I'm a 3.5 or a 6.8? No problem, right? However much of your kids are in those grades is how much of the calculation it counts for. So if you're a 3.5 and 2/3 of your kids are in grades 3 and 4, and 1/3 is in grade 5, then the performance of the kids in grades 3 and 4 counts for 2/3, and the kids in grade 5 count for 1/3. I mean, it's pretty straightforward. And again, the other question is, where does the 20 students come in, right? Used to be you had to have 20 students worth of data in 5 out of the 8 scored indicators, so you had to have groups of 20 students or more. As we break down to these smaller grade groups, is that where the 20 students is? No, it's still top of house. It's the very highest level. And that's because, again, we don't want to make this group of students invisible. We need to be able to look at their progress and track and identify places where we need to support. There's a lot of additional stuff that comes into this calculation. I'm not going to go into it here today other than to say, if you want to know more, please come to my session. But I did want to show kind of how this math plays out just a little bit. Again, this idea that you take the total students in the group, you figure out the number who are proficient, you figure out that denominator at the bottom. Again, that's that number of students who tested or 95% of those who should have. Again, don't worry about checking out these numbers, just the concept is there. We use that to calculate that raw percent proficient. We divide that by the annual interim target. Again, that gives us a preliminary indicator score that we multiply by that grade weight, that percentage of the total that they are. And this is one improvement, I think. I think your elementary and middle schools are really going to like this feature now, because it actually gives you a really nifty view of where your strengths are in those grade bands. In this example, if you can see those teeny tiny numbers on the screen, you'll notice that in grades 3 and 4, they're way overshooting the target. In grades 5 and 6, they're just barely under the target. And in grades 7 and 8, they're only about halfway to the target, right? And so it really helps you to identify where you might need to focus your efforts. And that's the whole point. The data doesn't give you the answer. It just tells you where you need to start asking the questions and focusing your attention. So with that, let's move on. This I just spent some time, back. So where do you find these targets that we're about to take a look at? If you go to www.isb.net/summative, and I apologize that you'll have to remember that. We are not linked off the main page. And you can type a keyword in, but it might not get you what you need. So www.isb.net/summative. And we have a big green button that says individual indicators. And if you click that, it'll take you to a page that has a heading for each of the individual indicators. And if you open it, you will find some common information as well as resources specific to that particular indicator. And that would include the targets. We've put them there broken out for grades 3 and 4, 5 and 6, 7 and 8, high school, or all of them together if you're a unit district. So whatever you need, we're trying to get it to you. So very briefly, I do just want to show these to you and point out what the targets are for the two groups, English learners and former English learners, and they're the last two columns on the right. So in grades 3 and 4, for ELA proficiency targets, English learners are at 5.3, and former English learners are at 30. Again, such a wonderful sign that your work is having a fantastic impact on your kids, that former English learners are outperforming their peers. You guys knew that, though. Math targets, 6%, 28.77 for former, 1.4 for 5th and 6th graders, for 24.81 for former, 1.57 for English learners, former English learners, 18.53. These are really low numbers, and that's where our kids were in 2021, and that's okay. We will get them where they need to be. We just have to get them back up to highway speeds. 2.12 for English learners, 22.97 for former, ELA at 7 and 8, 1.55, 17.61 for math. Targets for high school, 1.32, 22.78. Again, high schools, you have such a unique challenge with your English learners. 2.33, 21.97 for math at high school. So again, you can download those off the website. And now we get into the actual English learner progress to proficiency indicator. In a way, it's similar, but we take the calculation down to the individual student level rather than the group level. So it's the same idea. There's a certain amount of gain that a student makes. You guys live in the world of proficiency levels, right? We're trying to get to that 4.8. We use a scale score. There's a scale score that's equivalent to 4.8 at every single grade level. And we do that so that we can detect even really small amounts of progress, because we want to give credit to you and to the kids for every ounce of credit, progress that they make. So we've got the amount of gain that they make from year to year. Remember, we're going 2020 to 2022 for this year. And then we divide that by a target. And we calculate two types of targets for each student. One is a timeline target. It's a linear calculation. It's literally the amount a kid needs to grow each year to be proficient at the end of 5, now 6 years. And so it's always the same. You calculate it once, and it's done. The other thing that we do, because we know that kids don't actually grow linearly, right, is we calculate a revised target, and that gets recalculated every single year. So for kids who grow really quickly in those first few years, the targets get smaller and smaller and smaller, right? They're getting super close to where they need to be. They shouldn't have to get as far. Their targets should be smaller. The students where they don't make the progress that we would want in those first few years, their targets do get bigger, but we always use whichever is smaller. We use the smaller of the timeline target or the revised target. Because again, a timeline target is still a good target to shoot for. If they keep making that amount of progress, even if it takes them longer than 5 years, they will get there. And so we want to have targets for kids that are achievable. So we do that. We then average up all the individual student scores, and that's how we get the school score. It's the only indicator that we score this way. It's scored at the student level and then aggregated up. Everything else we aggregate first, then score. And again, we talked about the three big changes: the 1 extra year to the timeline, the 2020 as the prior, and then the fact that that excludes students who were newly identified in 2021. So what does this actually do for kids? And I have a few examples, and if you guys have ever heard me present before, these are my sample students. Millie is a student, and she's got some years left in her timeline. So you can see in that green column in the middle what happens, right? When we all of a sudden give her an extra year, her old target was 393, because that's what you gotta be to be proficient in grade 6. Now she needs to be proficient in grade 7, so that makes her target 400, but we're dividing that by 6 years. So she actually has a smaller target when we do that for her. And so when we give her a score, it actually results in a larger score for her. Yuan is a student who is past his timeline. And students who are past their timeline don't have any targets. They just literally need to get to proficient, because the longer that they go past that 5 years, the less likely they are to actually reach proficiency. And unfortunately, even when we give him an extra year, it doesn't change his math. Once you're past your target, you're past your target. But it also doesn't hurt him, right? He's still earning the same points he would have otherwise. May, as a student, was right on the cusp. She was at her 0 year, but by giving her an extra year, she actually then does get some targets, so it changes her math pretty significantly, and it also helps get her some extra points. I put Alembwe in as an example because he's a student that was newly identified in high school, and so he's a little bit of a unique case because he still gets the full 5, now 6 years, but the highest he can ever go is grade 12, right? That's his targets don't keep going up. His target's grade 12. So you can see how that impacts his math. He's got plenty of years to his timeline, so he'll get there. And last but not least is my example student, Bernard, who was newly identified in 21, and he's there to illustrate the fact that he won't get a score because he was newly identified in 2021. I shared a slide like this last year, and it was a big hit. So this is the ELP to P report in CIS. Remember, I have a whole session devoted to this, so come attend, but some key details. A minus B equals C, that's that scale score gain that we were talking about. D is that 5-year timeline target that is now 6 years for most of our kids. E is that revised target, it changes yearly. D and E are equal in the first year, right? Because it's the same. So just some fun things. Every student is getting a partial year. Normally when you looked at column H, it would be lots of zeros, maybe a 1 or 2 here or there. Now every student is going to have a 1 in that column, almost every student. That has the impact, though, of changing columns J, K, L, and M. So if you go access this report, expect things to look a little different than they have in the past. And the main thing here is that this idea is that when you're in your timeline, things keep getting smaller, but once you're past, it's just traveling the distance. So that's all that. Again, this report combines information from the most recent academic year and the current academic year. The column you guys all want is column N. Column N for Nancy or not. That's their target for the academic year that you're currently in. That's what they need to do in order to stay on track for the current year. Super helpful. And then, last but not least, just how do you figure out targets for future years? Again, we'll go into that in much greater detail in a different session. Just want to point you to some useful resources. I know this was a lot of information in a very short period of time, But we have a website, again, isb.net/summative. It's been totally redesigned. You're mainly going to want to be on the individual indicators page. When you go there, you'll want to look for the English Learner Progress to Proficiency indicator. When you open it, you will find some common information. It will tell you whether it's federally required or state selected. ELP2P is federally required. Its weight, a description, scoring description, the scoring formula specifically, anything new in 2022 that you need to know, and any indicator-specific resources. I mentioned there was that report in SIS, and last but not least, please, 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 if you have any questions about these reports, about the data, about how to interpret it, please give me a call. That is my phone number. That is my email address. Please write it down. I try to be as responsive as humanly possible. I love to schedule time to meet with groups and talk through their data. So please, 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 let me help you help your kids. Thank you so much for your time today. Oh, yeah, if we have time, that'd be fantastic. Yeah, absolutely. Sometimes I run long. Yeah, if anybody wants to raise a hand or just... We've got a microphone. Oh, perfect. Ray? Yes. I just want to say thank you for breaking this down into understandable terms. It's really granular.
Excuse me, could you repeat your question on the microphone? That'd be great, because otherwise we won't be able to hear it. So let me get...
Yeah. Sing, she's right here.
I just wanted to say thank you to Ray for breaking this down into chunks for us, because it's really granular information. And the analogy of driving to Springfield really makes a lot of sense as far as how we get our kids back on the road. So thank you for taking very quantitative information and breaking it down into an understandable way for some of us who think on the other side of our brain.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. Can you please raise your hand if you have any questions?
Just a quick question. When will the Progress to Proficiency report be posted on iWAS?
Great question. October 3rd. And I am sorry that it is so late, but we had some delays in the 22 data, and we're also rebuilding the system. All those changes that I talked about meant we had to go back and kind of rebuild it from the ground up. So it's taken us a little longer than we would have wanted. So October 3rd. Great question. Thank you. Anybody over on this side? I don't want to ignore the left side. Right side? Which side?
I'm looking around. Raise your hand. I thought I saw 3 hands. No?
Well, again, I'll be here today and tomorrow, so if you see me walking around, don't hesitate to snag me and ask me any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Ray.
Thank you, guys.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Josie Yanguas. I'm director at the Illinois Resource Center. And I want to tell you that we are more than 500 people strong here, probably probably one of the highest registrations we've ever had for the bilingual directors meeting. So that's a great reason to applaud yourselves and applaud all of us. I will, in advance, apologize for all the craziness that was this morning in the parking lot. I participated in that too. So know that all these presentations the sessions here in the general ballroom are being videotaped. I am sure that Ray will be happy to share her PowerPoint presentation as well on the website for the conference. but know that all this information will be available. I know some people, Ray, were commenting that some of the numbers were a little small. So, but know that you'll be able to repeat and view this over and over again to your heart's content, and learn everything there is to know about accountability. So Ray is saying it's really great if you have insomnia, so absolutely. And I also want to give a shout out while I have the podium here to all of this is a wonderful collaborative relationship that we have with the Illinois State Board of Education Multilingual Division. It's always a pleasure to help sponsor this event. But I also want to give a shout out to all of the staff here at the IRC that are helping tirelessly. You'll be seeing their presentations today and tomorrow from our education specialists. But this event is successful because A, of the collaboration with the State Board, and B, because of all the fine people who are involved in it. So I am really very appreciative of that. So it's now my pleasure, and as you can tell, we are definitely running ahead of schedule, so we'll try to give you some of those minutes back, because I know we started a little early. It is such a pleasure for me to introduce to you our keynote speaker, Ester DeJong. She's just made a big move. For those of you who follow Ester, you've probably been associating her with the University of Florida, where she was the professor in ESOL and bilingual education, as well as the director of teaching and learning at the University of Florida, but she has just made a dramatic move. She's gone to a very pretty part of the country, to Denver, Colorado, where she's an associate professor, I believe, in the culturally and linguistically diverse education program. So I think it's congratulations to Ester for moving to a beautiful part of the country as in her next step in her academic career. Prior to Ester working in academia, she had been working in the K-12 public school system in Massachusetts, and she at that point was an assistant director for bilingual education and ESL programs. Her research focus is on equity and integration in the context of dual language education and preparing teachers to work with bilingual learners in K-12 schools. She's, of course, written lots and lots of journal pieces, and she's also published a book, including Foundations for Multilingualism and Education, a publication with Caslon. And Ester is also a tireless person in the area of service. So Ester was president of TESOL International from 2017 to 2018. So for those of you who know what it's like to be president, it also means you have the pleasure of being both past president as well as president-elect. So Ester, I'm sure, spent lots and lots of time with Illinois for International TESOL, so thank you for doing that. And she's also a board member of the Center for Applied Linguistics. And most excitingly now, she is a founding member of an organization called the National Committee for Effective Literacy. Their website, and I want you to write this down, is multilingualliteracy.org, multilingualliteracy.org. It is going to be, it's a new site this year. That I suggest that you look at. This is an organization that it includes lots of people who are wonderful researchers in the bilingual community, including Kathy Escamilla, including Ester, including Lori Olson, including people here in Illinois, such as Sonia Soltero and our own Cristina Sanchez Lopez. So the National Committee for Effective Literacy is really studying policy. It really wants to uplift research and policies around what it takes for bilingual students to become proficient readers and writers in English, as well as, especially in additional languages as well, so they can thrive and in our schools and in our communities. And the committee basically got created in response to the narrow approach to the science of reading and to expand our thinking on literacy instruction for English learners. So we are just so blessed to have Ester here to present on issues regarding literacy instruction. This is a return trip for Ester. She was here in 2016, so I know some of you had a chance to hear her then. And so it is just such a blessing that we have Ester coming here today to share her thoughts with you as well. So, Ester, thank you. what?
No, I have this one. Oh, okay, good. Thank you. Thank you for a lovely introduction. I realize I cannot start speaking till I'm actually here and the microphone goes on. Who was with me in 2016 when we were in a very small room and talking about systems approaches? Do you remember? You don't remember anything about my presentation. I don't expect you to do that. But you may remember that I probably covered the entire space while I was at it. So I'm a walker when I speak. And today, my camera colleague has made sure that I can only walk so much. So if you see me move beyond this spot, folks over there, I really want to be able to look at you. If it were me, I'll be walking that way. But I can't. And the other corners just about that I have is about here. So you guys have the privilege that I'm going to be closer to you. Then I'm going to be closer to you. So I am so sorry that I cannot actually see you a little bit closer than I would like to. So broadening the conversation. So first of all, of course, thank you, Josie, for having me here again. I think this is one of the favorite places to be. People who are actually doing bilingual education. We can say bilingual education here. And so it's really kind of rewarding to be here. I love the introduction. One of the things that my heart is in bilingual education and advocating what's right for bilingual learners. I know that not all of our learners are in bilingual programs. Sometimes that's just not a feasible thing to do. And so my quest has kind of been, whether it's teacher preparation or working with teachers or with principals, is like, but just because we don't have a bilingual program does not mean that the children are not bilingual. And so we need to think about what does that mean, right? And so the work that Josie talked about in terms of NSEL, that one of the things that we're realizing is that what we need to do is actually take what we know from bilingual education and make sure that we use that as we engage with all kinds of other discourses and conversations. And so what I want to do today, and I need to figure out how, just here, I think, help. Yeah. So, okay, I got my clicker, it's working. I want to talk about, in terms of broadening the conversation, you may recognize some terminology on this one. I want to talk about the simple view. I want to talk about balanced instruction. And I want to talk about systemic programming. Does it remind you of a particular discourse or conversation? Good terms, right? Now, I'm going to take these terms, but I'm going to apply them not to reading or literacy per se, but I'm going to apply them to our own field, bilingual education. And so I want to take that and help us kind of go through the layers of the way that we have evolved in some of these places and how important it is that we've learned and layered on in terms of bilingual education. And then kind of end up with, so what does it mean in terms of our programming, but particularly how can that help us create conversations that are inclusive of our bilingual learners and where our bilingual learners are not the add-on. Sounds familiar? Still? How many years have you been in the field? How long in this country have we had bilingual learners? Who is the mainstream today? You are. Our kids are. Different linguistic and cultural experiences are. So we have still a long way to go to shift that narrative from monolingualism is kind of what's the mainstream versus all of the wonderful ways that we can be different is really what the mainstream is, right? So we're still fighting that fight. And so what I'm hoping that by the end of this conversation, we'll have a couple of ways that we can engage with the still kind of discourses that either exclude our learners, partially maybe include our learners, or think that our learners are just like any other learner. And for those of you who have followed me just about a little bit, my little other soapbox is that working with English language learners is not just good teaching. It's so much. Now, here's an interesting thing. I've always said it's more than that. I still believe that. increasingly I'm getting to the point of saying it's also different than that. And so we need to recognize the similarities and differences. If I get on my soapbox, I always kind of say, okay, it's enough now. But I have about oh gosh, I have a whole hour with you. Are you ready? Are you ready? You had breakfast? Got coffee? And of course, there's more coffee and breakfast. And I want to thank IRC and the hotel for putting this on so wonderfully, and the AV people. Perfect. Thank you. All right. Let's see. The simple view of bilingual education. Now we're going to go back in time just a little tiny bit. The early years of bilingual education, for those of you, you know this, Lau versus Nichols, right? We had to make sure that we served our English language learners in the school system appropriately. Here's one thing that happened in that larger dialogue at the time. That's interesting. Okay, so we had an issue, right, that we recognized. Increasingly children who spoke languages other than English came to school and didn't know English yet. And that was a growing number of learners, so we had to figure out what to do. And with Lau and some of the following court cases and policies, we kind of made that a linguistic problem. That's what I mean with a simple view. We made it a language problem. And so the solution to that problem became well, how do we then teach English, the language that we think is missing here, right? And so the debate, and you know this in our field, the debate became, should we teach the children through a bilingual education program, or should we do that through an English-only program? For those of you who've done the studying of this, remember how many models we have created as a result of this debate? The English-only models, the different bilingual education models, and I have no issue with that, but that became the focus. What is the language of instruction? And so that simple view then led to a kind of simple debate, which is the effectiveness debate. Which one is better? Is it better to have bilingual education? I almost stepped out of the line here. Is it better to do bilingual education? Is it better to take an English-only approach? Sounds familiar? Are you still being questioned on whether you should do bilingual education or not in your districts? We have so much data, guys. We have just so much data. It's so fascinating. So if you look at the data is very consistent and very clear, whether that's nationally or internationally. Bilingual education really works. And bilingual education works in terms of not just bilingualism, but in terms of English outcomes. Surprise, right? Surprise. And so we have a lot of studies that have looked at this, continue to look at this, because of course, if I may say so, the reason why we don't want to believe the data is for other reasons than what the data actually says. Am I allowed to say that in this group? Now, then there was this whole period, if you will, of like English-only kinds of things. We all kind of went through that. California had, and Massachusetts had kind of Arizona, had actual policies passing. And so they had to kind of think about it. There's a slightly different version of that very same effectiveness debate question. And that is, if we have these English-only policies, then do the kids do any better? And guess what? No. And we knew this, but it's always good to have data. I love the presentation earlier about the data points, which it's so hard to do that well, and I thought she did a brilliant job making this even accessible and understandable, right? So we noted that didn't work. So that simple view kind of is like, okay, so now that it works, but it is really, if you will, a input-output model. Right? We have the kids come in, we do bilingual ed, or we do English-only program, and we have outcomes, and we look at which one is better. But you know this big black box in the middle there? So how do we get there? So increasingly, people also started talking about, well, we also need to know about what goes into getting the results. And so we began to take a look at, well, what makes for an effective bilingual education program? That complexity layer, I think, is so important to pay attention to. This is broadening that conversation one. It's not just about the language of instruction. It's about the fact that we have a quality program in a school that pays attention to the entire program and all of the students. It's everybody's responsibility. We make sure that everybody is included. So that means that when you talk about bilingual education, yes, we talk about language of instruction, but we also talk about curriculum. We also talk about what we teach, how we teach. We talk about assessment and our assessment practices. I don't know about you, but if we don't have parent engagement and we build partnerships with our parents and our communities, it's really hard to run a good program. It's so much more than language of instruction. So one first is the broadening conversation is that we have to move away from just language of instruction and models to talking about all these other components that feed into what is a quality program. If we don't pay attention to all of these things, and I always say, if you don't have quality teachers, your program begins and falls with your teachers, right? So we are at the program pieces to piece. So that was the first phase. We have the simple view and then a little bit of a complexity on top of that. You're with me still? What's the lesson that you learned from the simple view with the complex addition? Write down in your notebook. Whole picture, right? All the different components that we need to think about. So the second piece then, we said, okay, we know now that this works. We know it's complex. So now we're going to move to dual language education.